WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by JW Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know's on there. I want to thank you for being with us today, each and every Tuesday at 2:30. Also replay at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday. Uploaded to social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, whatever platform you're on, you'll probably see it coming your way. We're talking about education today. We're talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson. Wesley, you've been around. A lot of people think, well, you know, it's a young guy. He looks like a real young guy. But you've been in Sampson County Schools. You've been superintendent. You've been teacher. You've served in the system office in Sampson County School. And I saw somewhere in your bio, too, you have a digital background in being the person supervising the digital aspect of school. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here. Absolutely.
I want to open today kind of at this level. I was reading 2018-2019, a school report card welcome letter, your statement. Clinton City Schools have strived to do whatever it takes to meet the individual needs of every learner every day in every one of our schools. Our desire is that all students to feel valued, accepted, and have a sense of belonging within their school environment. As superintendent of Clinton City Schools, in a COVID world, are you still able to do that?
Wow, that's a good question. We try to. Most recently, we just received an award from the NCASCD that's called the Whole Child Award, and for our work with Jesse Lewis Choose Love. And it's a movement that we're doing with our social and emotional learning, but we are incorporating it with our core curriculum. And we are very excited about that award because there was only one in the entire state. And so the work that we do, not only with teaching, reading, and writing and arithmetic, but the work that we're doing trying to grow our students into good citizens, fine young men and young women who have a sense of themselves and a sense of others and who respect themselves and respect others. I think we're doing a really good job. However, COVID has thrown us a curveball, of course, especially with our students that are remote. We have probably approximately about 25% of our population that's remote now, 25 to 30%. And so we are working diligently. Our teachers are working diligently, our administrators, our social workers, but there is probably a small few that we are still having difficulty to reach out, but we're doing home visits, we're making phone calls, and we're getting a lot better as this time period continues to go on.
You're in a world here, and you've got the background. Clearly, you've seen this for some time. You're in kind of a two-world system here in this county. You're one of the few in North Carolina that also have a county school system and a, quote, city school system, both in rural settings. When I look at that and I hear the acronyms, I remember a long time ago it was the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now it's STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And when I see all those, and then all of a sudden we got hit this year, as you just pointed out, with the ABCs with COVID. Where are we now with the ABCs? And when I'm talking about that, you understand what I'm talking about. Tell us what that is, where we are, and do you see that evolving back to an A platform? Are we in a B? Are we in a hybrid? Or is there a D on your list? Or where are we at with all that?
Well, currently we are kind of in a hybrid model.
It sounds like
it. Yes, sir. I like to call it Plan A hybrid. And so at our, I believe it was September 17th, Governor Cooper said that depending on local education agencies and the school dynamics, that schools had the option to move back to Plan A, but only at the K-5 level. 6-12 had to remain at Plan B. And so Plan B, of course, there are a lot more stringent guidelines when it comes to social distancing. You cannot have, you must maintain 6 feet of social distancing in all areas of the school, including the classroom. So for our middle school and our high school, at Sampson Middle and Clinton High School, we are still operating under Plan B. And those schools actually have the highest number of students that are attending school virtually. On October the 19th, our board made a decision at our September board meeting that on October the 19th at our K-5 schools, we moved to Plan A. And so there are less stringent guidelines when it comes to social distancing in the classroom. But the social distancing is still required in the hallways, when you are in congregate settings is the way that it's worded. So at LCK, Butler, and Sunset, we are under Plan A, and we probably have approximately 80% of our students back at those 3 schools, and classroom size is somewhere around 16 to 19, and so you still don't have the very big classrooms like you maybe used to have had before COVID, and we've done a really good job in the classroom setting with social distancing. Still doing some social distancing. It's not 6 feet in our Plan A's, but it may be 3.5, 4 foot of social distancing that, that we're trying to accommodate our students. So we're in that Plan A hybrid model with K-5 being Plan A, 6-12 being Plan B.
When we look at these 3 ABC kinds of plans and the mixture of it, do you have the ability, if somebody comes up with something that's maybe totally alien to, I can't imagine what it would be, but totally alien to that, to do something completely different, can you do that? Do you have to get approval? Is that something the school board would have to submit to Mandy Cohen, or how would that work?
Well, we have some pretty strict guidelines from North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and then NCDPI took their guidelines and they came up with their own guidelines called Lighting the Way Forward.
Okay.
And so working with those 2 guidelines that change pretty frequently, that's been a very difficult process of just trying to keep up with the amount of changes that come down from NCDHHS and NCDPI as we learn the science to COVID-19. But following those changes and all that's going on, the LEA has a lot of flexibility in determining whether you are in A, B, or C. However, you do have to follow the executive orders. So when there are ideas that come up, I mean, like we started at our 2 youngest elementary schools, we started 5 days a week, but we just had to make sure that we had the social distancing of 6 feet at all times. But because we had some of our classrooms being much larger than others and some classrooms being smaller, we used our larger classrooms to house additional students and our smaller classrooms to still maintain that 6 feet. So that was probably an alien concept to really start back 5 days a week at our K-2 schools, but we were able to do it because we were able to maintain the social distancing.
When I look at where we are, and recently in our conversation as we're having it now, I always try to say as we're having it now, because if somebody happens to see this and it's a week from now, it may be different statistically, but recent statistics shows us meaning Sampson County, and basically there are some associated counties, but primarily Sampson, as being kind of this real hard, solid red county, and it simply says you're number 5 in the state as it relates to cases. When you saw that data come out as a superintendent, what went through your mind when you saw the numbers going, bam, here you are in not only the top 10, but number 5 in the top 10 as it relates to the numbers of cases of COVID, which just simply means it seems to be there's a spread going on, or maybe not.
Right. So, of course, looking at those numbers, we've been looking at those numbers since day one. And so we were aware, actually, when we started back to school, Sampson County was number 2 in the state. When you looked at cases per 10,000, and now you're looking at cases per 100,000, because as you said, it changes, it evolves.
It's a per capita situation.
Absolutely, and it does look like we're number 5.
Yeah.
But we've been watching those numbers daily. I mean, I have a cabinet meeting every Monday with my staff, my executive staff. We look at those numbers. We talk about positivity rate. We look at hospitalization, and so we weren't surprised by those numbers. But it is surprising when you look at the number of cases in our schools. We have a dashboard on our website that we would allow and ask anybody to go and look at. And we've had, very few cases when you think about the number of interactions that occur. And we've actually had 0 cases that originated within the schools. All of our cases that we have had originated from the student's home. So a mom or a dad got the virus and then they gave it to a child. But we've had 0 cases where there was any spread within the schools. So we don't have any clusters, and we're watching those numbers and have frequent conversations pretty much daily with our local health department. And I have 2 individuals that are working with those conversations with the local health department each and every day.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because you got some very positive notoriety about the fact that you've had 0 cases generated in the school. In fact, there are those that would say, well, we need to look closer at Clinton City Schools to see what they're doing, quote, right, so we can emulate that kind of process. Is there any particular unique thing that you're doing that you could say to somebody, well, here's what we're doing to make sure that there's 0 cases generated inside the school, as opposed to maybe some other places that have had some, that seem to kind of come from within inside?
I wouldn't say any one specific thing. I think it just goes back to the work of our teachers, goes back to the work of our administrators, our custodians, our bus drivers. Everybody has really taken to heart those guidelines that I talked about in the Strong Schools NC and also the Lighting Our Way Forward. And they've really learned those rules, they've learned those recommendations, and we really worked hard this summer. We brought in a team this summer of teachers, we brought in a team of parents, central office people, and we really thought and looked at these documents, and we came up with a list of procedures, and our teachers, our students, everyone that's involved in the school has done a great job of following those, and I really think that has tremendously helped with the 0 spread, of cases in our schools.
And I think the 0 spread idea is probably, if you had to have one goal, if you had that would be utmost. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and I want to kind of continue this conversation, but I want to kind of take it out of the classroom a little bit and move into that emotional, psychological world aspect.
Sounds great.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us. We're going to take a first break here. We're talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson, Clinton City Schools. We're talking about the involvement of education vis-a-vis COVID-19. We'll be back in a moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. JW Simmons here. The name of the show is We Should Know. We come to you each and every week. And one of the things we want to try to impress upon you, we really appreciate your communication with us. We should know edu@gmail.com. We should know edu@gmail.com. Your comments related to guests we've had, things you would like to see us discuss in the future, recommendations, all of those things we take into account and we take very seriously. We try to research that, we try to bring it to you. And for going forward, not only this week, but in the future, that becomes even more critical. Specificity, more detail. You want to know not only what, but why. We get it, and we certainly are going to address that. We've worked on Zoom and various other media platforms. Some of them certainly I'm not great at. I've looked like I'm asleep part of the time, and sometimes probably if it was further away from my face would be better, but we're all facing that. We're all dealing with it. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson. We're talking, of course, about COVID right on. We will continue that conversation with COVID. Dr. Johnson, Clinton City Schools seems to be doing an outstanding job. We just talked about as we went to break this 0 origination thing. That's very important. It just simply says Clinton City Schools is not spreading COVID. Clearly that's the message. I want to segue that into the idea that the collective idea of parents, both grandparents, people that's looking after children. We still got a lot of people that's both parents is working, and quite frankly, if there's a job out there for them, most people are working. That leaves the child somewhere between virtual, between one of the ABC platforms here, between your teachers. Talk to us about the psychological impact of parents of COVID in trying to ensure the quality education for their child. and use your obvious position as a parent, which I put forth as probably one of the most important roles you carry in your life.
Right. Well, I appreciate that question. I think that's a very pivotal question, Mr. JW, because we think about the parents' involvement, we think about the students' involvement. And, one of the things that we've always strived to do here in Clinton City Schools, even well before me, was to be very family type atmosphere. We try to strive to have that in our schools. We want our students to feel welcomed and appreciated, all of our students. And so when you come into COVID season and you've got students that are some meeting 5 days a week, some meeting 2 days a week, like at our middle school and our high school, and others not having any face-to-face that they actually see the individual, across the table like you and I, that creates a situation that we have to work through. But I can tell you, I've had an opportunity to see and observe several of my teachers who are teaching virtually. I have been so impressed with the conversations that are going on. Even though it is a virtual, you just talk to your audience about Zoom and Google Hangout and all these other different platforms. Our teachers are doing a phenomenal job of having those conversations with those students, of basically getting into their virtual home and finding out, how are they doing? So it's more, we talked in the previous section about the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic, but school in 2020, especially school in the COVID era, is so much more than just the ABCs of instruction. It's really about ensuring social and emotional well-being, social and emotional health. And so we do have sometimes to check in on them and to do what we like to call in Clinton City as temperature checks. And we don't mean that an actual temperature check, but to see how they are feeling socially and emotionally. And when we have concerns, then we make contacts with our school social worker or with our guidance counselors. And those individuals are doing a phenomenal job of working with students and working with parents that may be going through very difficult times during this COVID era. Maybe a parent has lost a job, or maybe a child is going through a difficult home situation with possibly maybe like a divorce or something like that. And so we are there. We have made home visits. Now we do all those in a very safe way. I mean, we're not actually going into the home, but we may have a conversation with them outside of the home, of course, or socially distanced and all that, making phone calls. And so a lot of work to ensure those social and emotional health of our students is all going on, but also keeping the priority as well with the math, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all that. But that social emotional health is so important as well.
One of the things you just hit on that I think is important to look at, the virtual world literally does allow teachers to be inside the home, because if I'm communicating, if I'm doing it from my home office or whatever, somebody's there, they can see my bookcase in the background, they can see kind of what's going on. What does that do for educators to be able to have some visual clue as to the inside of the home? Even though it's a small space, it may be 3x4 something behind the person on the other end. Does that give the educator a sense of the environment that child's living in, both physically and emotionally? And if so, how does that accentuate the learning process?
Well, I think that's paramount. And before COVID, pre-COVID, as I like to call it now, we wanted our teachers to have a sense of the type of homes that our students were living in, or that they were, working from, or where they were coming from. And so oftentimes we would get our beginning teachers into our school buses, and we would drive them around, to the different areas of Clinton, to let them see, because still so many of our teachers in America, not just in Clinton, but or even North Carolina, but still so many of our teachers are former middle class families. And they don't really understand all the different socioeconomic classes. They don't really know what goes on, in what I like to say real life. So we've often wanted to, have our new teachers and all of our teachers to have a sense of what was going on. But now when you get to have a viewing of what's going on in the home, I think it does offer a unique perspective. They're able to gain and see and understand. You get to see, in many of these homes, they might have a mom and a dad assisting the child as they're working virtually. Other times I've heard about, an early elementary child with siblings there as they are conducting the classroom. The student is trying to do the work, and he's also having to watch maybe a sibling or two as he's trying to do his math, reading, and writing. So there are all types of varied environments, and our teachers are doing a great job. I think our parents are doing a great job as well. And as we come into situations that we need to find out more information, we're having those conversations. I like to call them critical conversations, making tough phone calls, having our guidance counselors and our social workers reach out so that we can have a good sense of, and that we can feel well about the things that are going on in the home.
I had an interesting conversation some time ago. Of course, I do a lot of these things, and the observation was about the social psychological issues that we were facing, and the comment was made there's kind of three different areas, and one of them is where I am, where I want to be or hope to be, and then there's the third one, which is a little sad, is that I'm not going anywhere and don't expect to get anywhere. Do you get a sense that we are seeing people finding themselves in a situation now with no jobs, they got laid off, they get that sense of number three, which is I'm here, I don't have a way to go anywhere, I can't get anywhere, I'm isolated, and that becomes the burden not only for the person but for the child and for the school system?
Wow.
I don't want to get too deep.
Yeah, right. That's interesting, and I appreciate you pointing that out, because I do think that we have varied levels of psychological development that is going on, or even places in their mind that a lot of our students are at, and a lot of their families. And so, it's interesting to try to make sure that you have that connection. Mm-hmm. And we've always been able to have that physical connection with all of our students, even though there were some, of course, more reserved than others, and some that would talk, more than others. But now, when you not necessarily when you don't have that, it's almost imperative that you make those connections and that you find out, how the child is feeling, because we're not seeing them. That if they're virtual, there's some students we've not seen, physically all year. And so it is important that we keep that temperature check, use that term again, on our students to make sure that they are well, psychologically, socially, and emotionally, because we want to make sure that all aspects of their lives are, kept healthy and educated.
And I think to that point, would we agree that there is then a direct relationship between the social and emotional skills and the ability to improve the cognitive behavior of a child or of a person or even of a parent?
Right. I think that's good. Well, I think we can go back, having, and I know you do too, having an educational background, we think about blooms.
Absolutely.
And we think about the taxonomy, and we know that it's important first that if we're not meeting the physical needs, you're never going to get to self-actualization. Absolutely. And so we've got to meet those needs, and we've tried to do that through the work with ensuring that all of our students have food. Because there was a lot of food insecurities back, in COVID, when we first started having COVID, and we've even continued to be able to offer grab-and-go meals and those types of things, but that's not enough. Students have to feel loved, they have to feel accepted, they have to feel respected, and so our teachers that are working both in the classroom and virtually are really working hard to ensure and let our kids know, yes, even though some of you we're seeing, some of you are not, that we still love you, we still care about you. We actually had the opportunity to form a video that we sent out, and the video was called We Miss You. And it was a video that we did. We had many individuals that were involved, teachers, coaches, board members, superintendents, just letting our students know, the ones that we are not seeing or the ones that we are, that we miss you, we care about you, we love you. I would ask all of our parents to go look at that. It's on our website, and really good, really well done.
We're going to take a break and come back. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us. We're talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson, Superintendent of Clinton City Schools. I want to thank you for being with us. We'll be back in a moment. Call a friend, stay tuned. Conversation continues about schools.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody trying to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking about education. We're talking about schools. We're talking about, more importantly, those things that make schools worthwhile, and that's students, parents, teachers, and the person that's giving us the information today, and the quote expert in the room is Dr. Wesley Johnson, Superintendent of Clinton City Schools. I introduced you saying that you've kind of walked in all the shoes that we're talking about. I mean, clearly you're a parent. Clearly you've taught in multiple classroom settings. Clearly you have background in various principalships throughout this county. Clearly you've worked as assistant superintendent in the world of digitality, if that is even a word in today's world. I think you can throw one out and we can place it somewhere. We find ourselves at this point, and I kind of like to segue it if we could, and I'm going to pick up on comment, and this comes from Public Schools First, NC. I know you've seen that group. One of the findings recently, statistically, and I'm just going to quote this, North Carolina houses 568,000 rural students, the second highest rural population in the U.S. after Texas. Ruralness is something that's not only here, but it's unique nationally. But for us in North Carolina, and then when you look at the eastern part of the state or the far western part of the state, where you see more rurals, less urban populations, it becomes critical. When we look at that, what do we need to do? What do we need to focus on? We've got a new superintendent-elect, Superintendent Pruitt. She's going to be coming in. Her background is very interesting. We can talk about that. But her key level position people and their sense of what ruralness is, let's talk about that for a minute, because I've known you for a long time and I know you've already analyzed a lot of this stuff.
Right.
So I want to get your sense of where we are, and are we in a good place now to make things happen?
Wow.
Not that you just take your time on that one.
Well, first, I think America was founded on a lot of rural education.
Absolutely.
And so there's a background and a familiarity that our nation has with rural education. And I think that rural education has a lot of strengths, a lot of family closeness, a lot of tight-knit bonds are formed in rural America. And so lots and lots of strengths. The things that we struggle with, of course, are access to fundings. Usually we struggle with older buildings, schools that have been around for a while, but also sometimes that caters to that strength, that your grandma went to that school or your mom or dad went to that school, and so you have a lot of pride in your school, and we have that here in Clinton City. But we also have a lot of need. And so we recently had the opportunity, every 5 years, NCDPI requires us to do a facility study. And we actually hired an outside agency to come in to do the facility study, because the last several had been, before I got here, they were done internally. And we wanted to have outside eyes on it so they could really look into the unique needs that we have here in Clinton City. And what they found, and we actually are presenting this to our county commissioners at the December board meeting for county commissioners, is that we have over $12 million in needs. And their facility needs with several aging buildings, buildings that are 70 years old, and roofs, major roof needs. Of that, of the $12 million, I think 7 is just roof alone. And so I'll give you one example. At Sampson Middle School, we need a roof probably 5 years ago. And we're talking about possibly now having to expose Sampson Middle School to the elements by when we get a roof, when we add a roof to the school, having to take it down to even past the base layer. Wow. That roof alone is over $2 million. And so when your county commissioners are doing all that they can to get you as much funding as they can afford, but we need the state to really come in and do some capital improvements. We need the state to give us additional funds for capital improvements. You know, several years ago, there was a court case called Leandro that we probably all know about.
Absolutely.
We've really not seen a lot of those funds. And we found out last year that there was this whole digital platform that all these funds were meant to go to rural education, and they've not been provided. That's over $7 million. So we really need a lot of help from our individuals in Raleigh and working to get this money, because it's not just Clinton City. It's not just Sampson County. As you noted, there's a lot of rural families, a lot of rural education, and we need this money to make these substantial capital improvements so our kids can go to school in safe environments that are, that the HVAC units and how important is that now? You know, that we're making sure that our students are breathing in clean and healthy air. So all these things are very, very important, and we really need some assistance with that.
In a recent conversation, one of our state legislators, he put forth the importance, in his opinion, of a state bond referendum. Where would you stand on that platform? We're basically, to kind of clear the air here and kind of help me through this comment, but typically counties and rural areas and throughout the state, the counties are the feeder for what you just mentioned, capital outlay funds. This idea was, hey, we've done this before. State bond referendum would allocate millions, yes, not just 12 million, which a lot of people go, oh, that's a lot of money, but it's really not when you start talking about capital outlay. So would you support that, and would you need to have that as a support mechanism to know what portion of that state bond referendum money Clinton City schools would get versus Sampson County schools versus Wake County schools? How would that look to you as a superintendent?
That's a good question too, JW. You know, there was a lot of conversation about this pre-COVID, and there was actually some tables that were sent out displaying money that would come from a state bond referendum or from a governor's kind of like rainy day fund. Yep. I'm sure that's probably been exhausted with what we've dealt with for the last 9-10 months.
Been raining a lot.
Right. Yeah. But at one time, the state bond referendum was supposed to give us $7 million, and then the governor's was showing us $4 million. Listen, we were excited and happy with either one, because we have so many needs here in our district that just with county commissioner funds, we can't generate that type of money. I mean, again, I'm very thankful for what our county commissioners are being able to provide for us, but we get approximately $300,000 to $350,000 a year for capital improvements. That would take us almost 10 years just to put a roof on Sampson Middle School. And so there are lots and lots of issues and concerns, and yes, I would wholeheartedly support a state bond referendum or just the money that's supposed to have been given to the school system from Leandro, or the technology funds that I talked about just previously in the last question. There has to be some investment, some really tough investments into education if we want to get as a state where we want to get to in 5, 10, 15 years. There's going to have to be some significant investments into education.
Sometimes when I'm talking to folks about this subject, it's also, I have to realize there's, differing of opinions, and I think a lot of people get very, defensive when we talk about these issues, but I see it as very important, because I think that's what our society is built on, is the ability to have differing opinions and to have a conversation and move forward from that. But the idea with some folks is that there's not an evidential base to say that more funds improves the educational outcomes, that there's a false corollary, that there's, if we give you another 20 or 30 million for whatever, that's not necessarily going to change how that person turns out from high school to whatever his trade skill is or college level. It's not going to affect that. How do we explain and work our way through that kind of cavern of events, I guess, to get people thinking closer together on these issues?
That's a good question as well. I think more importantly than anything is to show them your needs. And so when I have been able to, have these conversations and tough conversations with our county commissioners, I have been able to provide them pictures of actually rain dripping through the ceilings in many of our schools. When we have tough and large downpours, oftentimes we have rain that seeps into our schools through, maybe underneath the building area. So we have lots and lots of needs. And you may be right, because as I went back and talked about earlier with rural education, maybe our parents went to that school and we have a lot of self-pride. But again, especially with COVID season now, we have to ensure that our schools are as clean and as sanitized and as disinfected as possible. And our custodians in Clinton City Schools and our teachers are doing a fantastic job. But of course, the newer the school is, the more clean it's going to be. The more, the better HVAC unit it's going to have, the better way it's going to be able to clean out the impurities of the air. Because, it's just newer technology. But when you're dealing with older systems that may be 30 and 40 and 50 years old, then you're dealing with those old times. And so those are important things that we need to improve upon in Clinton City.
And plus you add to that the word asbestos, and all of a sudden everything kind of gets really blurry for folks because they say, well, let's just tear that thing down and start over, because folks are worried about future diseases, cancer, and other things starting to impact. We're coming up on our second half. Dr. Johnson, what I'd like to do is kind of go ahead and segue to that and allow us to get into some other things, but there's so much to talk about. It's like I've told a number of my guests when I have them, I'd love to have you back for a semester here. Maybe you could do me some good as well and educate me. So we'll be back in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson, Clinton City Schools, well known in Sampson County. The issues always is the children, what we're doing to improve their lives and expand and improve their future. Join us. We'll be back in one moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. JW Simmons here. The name of the show is We Should Know. We're talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson. Information and education brought to you on Star Communications, Channel 16, WCLN Radio simulcast. And Dr. Johnson, we're in the last segment of the show. Thank you again for being with us. We were talking on break about the number of times you've come in and given us the opportunity to kind of dig deeper into education. Doing that today, as we went to break, we were talking about some things that were not necessarily related to COVID. We were talking about some capital outlay funds, referendums, bond referendums, those kinds of things. A lot of folks would say to me in that conversation, I'm going to kind of get this on the table, the big chunk of budgets, both the local and state, go to education. Not to roads, not to anything else, that goes to education. How much of that budget, a half, 3/4? If you were sitting in those seats to kind of dice that budget up, at what point in time, because nobody that I know wants to talk about a tax increase, how much of that budget is enough or too much?
Wow. Well, those are good numbers, and of course they're important that we think about that. But now with all the charter schools we have, and with all these different types of schooling, and there's vouchers now, in virtual NC, virtual public school that we have students participating in. As you noted, and as we talked about, all that money's lumped together. And so you've got K-12 education, you've really got K-16 when you think about all the universities and the money that they get as well. But what oftentimes that we forget, I think, Mr. JW, is the fact that so much of the money that goes to education goes to pay for personnel. when I look at I think it's $27 million budget that we have here in Clinton City, over 80% of the $27 million goes to pay for teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, instructional assistants. So the vast majority of your funds goes to pay for teachers, goes to pay for the people that educate and drive our kids to school. And so you think about that then you've got to run the system on 15% of all the money that you get. And so that's a big chunk. But also when we think about, you and I talked in the last segment about rural education. Mm-hmm. And we talked about in most most counties like ours and Sampson or Clinton City, that's a lot of your workforce. So if you weren't paying those funds, then what would your community look like? I mean, for us, basically, we've got our farmers, we've got Smithfields, and we've got a few others, but Sampson County Schools and Clinton City Schools pays a majority of the workforce of the people who live here. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important that, when we think about money, you ask me the question, I don't know the percentage that we need. All I know is we need more.
And I think that's going to be the issue going forward. And whether it's a bond referendum or whatever, we're going to see expansion of that. And whether it's a world, the paradigm is shift, is going to see us a year from now, 2 years from now, we're still going to be expanding that virtual world. But at the same time, it doesn't take away, does it, the need for the physical structure?
Oh, no.
I mean, that's kind of an obvious question, but I think people started asking themselves, well, if we're doing all this, do we actually need all these classrooms and all this building? Even more so, would you not agree?
Oh, I agree. I mean, and what I think people know, I think people are aware, because, we talk about Star, and I know Star, mm-hmm. This show airs on Star, but to think about the platforms and the expense of having to do virtual education.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's well more than like brick and mortar type buildings. Oh, yeah. And we've been able to, through the help of Star, we've been able to put up some opportunities for some of our homes to have free internet services, mm-hmm. and those are great things. Mm-hmm. But to have the availability to see kids in the building 5 days a week or 4 days or 2 or whatever it is, those are where those key bonds are talked about. A couple of years ago, under a previous state superintendent, we talked about the power of relationships. And you've got to have those relationships because, when you have those relationships with students, they're impactful. And I think about just relationships I had with my administrators. They helped me to want to become an administrator because I had such great relationships with my former assistant principals and principals. And when we think about relationships that are built with teachers, vastly important to help and motivate our students to go out and do great things.
I want to segue to something else. I told you on the break, if I don't get to this, I'm probably going to be in trouble. But how important is sports to the education arena, both in the sense of the psychological, emotional self, and also the financial self of an institution like Clinton City Schools? How critical is sports to that?
It's critical. Now, I don't know about how much, but it's critical that we have and participate in athletics. Of course, school is so valuable, but all aspects of school. When we think about school, when we think about interscholastic activities such as band and dance and athletics, you learn so many critical components of real life mm-hmm. by doing and participating in those activities. And we have so many of our population that's involved in coming to school and going to the classrooms, but then you think about the activities outside of the classrooms, even things like theater arts and the FFA and the FCCLA. We got so many of these students that are involved in these activities that they gives them a sense of who they are, and they go on to great careers and that all started by becoming parts of these organizations. So athletics, the band, the arts, the clubs, the organizations are critical components of a school.
And I was trying to remember these 3 components that I was told to remember is that sports teaches discipline, structure, and self-worth. Would you agree with those, and what would you add to that?
Oh, I think any type of involvement in those extracurricular activities that we talk about, do all of those. I mean, determination, motivation, teamwork. one of the great things about being in a band or being in an organization or being on an athletic team is I learned to work with others. I mean, and we talk about this all the time because, you know, several people have said, and people in business have talked about these soft skills that students need to learn. And it's always the type of things like teamwork. You learn those critical components by being on teams, by participating in a band, by working with others. And so I think that those are very important skills that need to be learned and that we can learn and enhance through athletics and band and arts and all those types of things.
You again pointed to the needs we have in our county, and Stephen Barrington's been on the show, our economic developer here, and we've talked about education and structures, actually new buildings throughout the county, Clinton City and others that support education, become some sense of a draw for economic development. Do you look at it from the superintendent's point of view and see that vision if you were a CEO of some, I don't know, company, pharmaceutical, otherwise, that may be looking at this area? Would you be looking at education as how, if you were coming here, where's my children going to go to school? What does that school system look like? What's the development of the community? What are the housing structures around? Would that impact your decision as a CEO or maybe a large corp chairperson?
Well, I think it plays a huge impact. I mean, to think about the quality of your schools and where you're going to have the opportunity to raise and rear children, to have, you know, these institutions of higher learning, these institutions of importance of, you know, getting your students into, and that kind of goes back to a previous question we talked about when we talked about, you know, newer type buildings. You know, you want your students to have an opportunity to feel safe and to be secure when they're at school. But yeah, I think it plays a critical component. And when we think about things like, well, I know we talked about the ABCs, but we didn't really talk about like accountability and the ABCs of public instruction when it talks about like testing. That's why it's important when you think about like school grades, like a school grade of an A or a B or a C or a D or an F. You want to have some sense of value of that school because you want to ensure that your school is an A, B, or no lower than a C, because you want your parents of your school to feel like they're going to a place that is you know, highly successful. And that's what we strive to do here in Clinton City.
And that gets back to outcomes again.
Absolutely.
At some point in time, it all comes down to this outcome reality figure and what we're putting in. What is that outcome and how do we measure that? Are we doing an adequate assessment and measurement of our outcomes, i.e. A, B, C, D, E equals positive outcome, or should it be E, F, R, G equals positive? Are we doing a reasonable assessment of that?
I think we are. You know, you talked about some of my, you know, the things I've done in my career. I had the opportunity for 5 years to be a testing and accountability director. Now, I wouldn't do things like we do in North Carolina, make some changes, because I don't really think that they get into really searching for skills. It's more like an autopsy because we give an end of the year assessment. But, you know, I think accountability is a good thing. I think we should have some sense of understanding of what's going on in the classroom. And, you know, I am really someone who pushes hard the administration and the upper administration being in the classroom on a daily basis because I think that's important. But not everybody's able to get into the classrooms. But we've got teachers doing wonderful and great things. I would like to see some type of assessment where it's more maybe quarterly, and we're looking to see the growth of students. Right now, North Carolina puts about a 20% measure on growth and 80% on achievement. I think it should be possibly the other way around, maybe 80% on growth. Because a teacher, we really find out the salt of a teacher and how good they are with the ability to grow kids through the school year.
Yeah, and I think we could probably spend an entire show just talking about assessments and evaluations as it relates to impact on not only students but communities as well. I want to thank you for being here, and I got about 10 seconds I can give you for a quick wrap.
Oh, Mr. JW, I appreciate it. I've always been a fan of the show. I appreciate your knowledge of education. You always ask me some tough questions, but some questions that your public needs to know, and I'll look forward to my next visit.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Dr. Wesley Johnson, Clinton City Schools. I want to thank you for being with us today. And as always, when we kind of come to the close of the show, I want to remind you again, we should know edu@gmail.com is that email address. And quite frankly, that's probably the best way to get up with us. We always, again, look forward to your comments and your commentary. And each and every show, I always try to end with this little motto, and it's called, May God Bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host JW Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.